I'm Jeremy Moore. I'm sorry it took us 3 weeks to get here. That was how the British Land Forces commander greeted the 400 residents of Port Stanley who came out to thank the men who had fought for their freedom. Tired men, footsore, mud-stained, and quietly very pleased with themselves. Somehow, those massive packs felt lighter now.
How are you feeling, lad? Great. Get the pubs up. Give them a cheer. Yep.
They'd yomped, they'd fought, and now it was over. The Royal Marines, who'd surrendered here 73 days earlier, were back, as they'd promised, to help raise the original Union Jack again. They had a little competition. The Paras boasted they'd been first into the town, as they explained to ITN reporter Jeremy Hands.
Who was the first to put up the flag? Two Para! I put it up again. Two Para the first in again? That's right, again. Para was first in. How much did you beat the others? 2.5 hours. So how long have you been here now? Since about 3 o'clock. 2 on 2, 3 o'clock. What sort of opposition was there? Running opposition. Running? They ran away.
I never had any doubt before.
Excited congratulations for Mrs. Thatcher on the Downing Street pavement. Beside a Port Stanley pavement, the Argentine troops surrender their rifles to the Royal Marines. During the hours after the ceasefire, a small team of British officers had gone to the government secretariat to finalize the terms of the surrender. The document was signed for Britain by General Jeremy Moore. On Victory Green, British soldiers celebrated the surrender. More Argentines filed towards the town centre to be disarmed. 4-2 Commando had been given the job of clearing them from the town completely. And they went as best they could, some pushing an injured colleague in a wheelbarrow. "8,400 defenders surrendered in Port Stanley to a British land force that was 2/3 the size. It turned out that the conscripts had been left to defend the mountains to the west, while the regular troops guarded the airport and prepared for an expected British landing nearby. Now they were all heading for the airport because the British had decided it would become a huge temporary prison camp. Most seemed pleased it was all over, but a few still had a bit of fight left in them. At the airport, wrecked Pucaras were evidence of the success of the Harrier attacks. To protect the prisoners from the cold, a few tents were made available, but the ones meant to do the job had gone down on the Atlantic conveyor, so the prisoners improvised as best they could. But many just wandered aimlessly around the runway their forces had spent so much time and effort trying to defend. To do it, they'd had field guns, an Exocet launcher used to attack the Glamorgan, Tiger Cat anti-aircraft missiles, and 105mm artillery. All around the runway, water-filled craters from the RAF Vulcan bombing runs. On the runway, the mud rings constructed to look like craters. Far from the airport being out of action, the Argentines were flying in supplies right up to the day before the surrender. In the town, a row of little-used armoured cars. Placing a field gun beside the pub and an anti-aircraft gun in the school playground, made it plain how little the Argentines cared about the islanders' lives or property. Inside the post office, as in many of the other buildings they commandeered, mindless vandalism and looting, the floor used as a toilet. Tidying up would take much time and effort. Some buildings had been wrecked by shelling. Their owners came out to see if there was anything worth rescuing. Whole streets were filled with the wreckage and silence of sudden, unexpected departure. For the islanders, picking up the pieces of their lives again seemed a daunting task, and everyone knew the Falklands would never be quite the same again. The town's police station had taken a direct hit, not from incoming shells, but from an Argentine missile that turned back. The Argentines had placed their biggest field gun between houses, gambling that because of that the British would not fire back. But British shelling had accidentally hit a house where 2 Falklands women were staying. British soldiers helped carry them from Port Stanley Cathedral. In all, 3 islanders were killed in the conflict and 4 injured. Argentine prisoners of war nearby stood to attention as the coffins passed. In a town of just 800 people, the deaths of 3 members of their tightly knit community touched everyone. Canberra now came into Port Stanley Harbour to collect the first batch of prisoners. Agreement had been reached with the Argentine government. They would sail straight to a mainland port, but there were to be no relatives waiting for them on the quayside, just a group of grim-faced officers. Back home, the prisoners would tell stories of how some officers shot those who tried to run away from the British advance, and told the others the British would eat them if they were caught. Argentina was to refuse to give up its claim to the Falklands, but many of its prisoners going home never wanted to see the islands again. In Buenos Aires, riot police were called in as news of Argentina's defeat brought angry crowds out into the streets. Inevitably, General Galtieri paid the price of failure. His reign as President and Commander-in-Chief of the Army was over. In Port Stanley, Sea King pilots flew in to take a look at the town, among them Prince Andrew.
I've seen fire. It's come past me. I was airborne at the time when the Atlantic conveyor was hit, sadly. I was doing a job of work at the time, quite high. I saw Atlantic conveyor hit by the missiles.
Across in Bluff Cove, Sir Galahad was about to become an official war grave. The Welsh guards who survived sang in Welsh for those who died. Two para gathered to remember their dead and asked themselves how they'd been changed by war.
We have all experienced events in the last 4 weeks that have probably changed our lives. What I would ask you to remember is what you felt when you thought you were going to die, and what was important to you then. It may have been your wife, it may have been your girlfriend, maybe your dog. It may even have been your life itself. Think on. what is important? Remember those who will not be going home with us. And we think and pray for their loved ones to whom they will not return.